have many poets that I read, and one that I really enjoy is Emily Dickinson. And she said, "If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life that aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin unto his nest again, I shall not live in vain." Emily was a lot like me in that she was very prolific with her writing, and she struggled to share herself with others. She had a very strong voice, but she hid a lot of her poems in her room. She chose not to embrace life and come out before people and say, "This is who I am." So later they found her work and it spread. So I was like that. I was a recluse for a little bit. I was afraid to leave. I hid from everyone. I hid my struggles. I hid my mental illness that I struggle with, but not anymore. I've chosen to no longer hide. And I feel a connection with Emily because of the poetry and because of this struggle that we both had to share ourselves with the world. And I'm hoping kind of in her honor that I can continue to embrace this speaking and share with others. One of the things I like to say is I am nobody but Jodi. And that part of Jodi and her artistic creation is that she struggles with PTSD, with bipolar, with a lot of the depression and emotions that I struggle to overcome with. In my second book of poetry that I've published a couple of books. In my second one, I went to Montpelier in Vermont, the capital, and spoke in front of Senator Patrick Leahy and other delegates. And I had my book to sell, and I did signings, and I kind of talked about, let's reduce stigma. Let's look at the person. Let's look at everyone as just themselves and first find out who they are before the barriers we put up. So as I was signing books, this one man, a Vermont Santa, he came up to me, and he had a giant belly, bigger than mine, and he had suspenders and white hair and a white beard, and he came up and he said, "Well, I bought your book." And I went, "Thank you." And then he said, "I have a son who has schizophrenia." He said, "I was trying to connect with him, so I gave the book, after I read it, I gave it to my son." He said, "Well, he put it on the coffee table and that was that. He didn't think of it." He said, "Well, 2 weeks later, my son called me over." He said, "And I never was close with my son. I couldn't understand what he was going through." He said, "I sat down in his apartment and we spent 2 hours going over the poetry that he felt was most like him." He said, "I had never connected with my son before, and I did that day because of you." And then he said, "Thank you," and he went off into the crowd. And I thought, how can we, all of us are individuals, we're all ourselves, and how can we uplift other people? I want to do more of that. So I started coming out of my shell more. I started talking and giving speeches. One of the things with my PTSD is that I have trauma-induced voices from when I was young. Every day I hear these male voices that tell me I'm no good, that I deserve to die, that I'm not worthy. And it's just something that I've struggled with since my 20s. It's something that haunts me every day. I've tried lots of medications. I've tried all kinds of things, different therapies, but I have to accept that it's just something that I'm living with. Still Jodi, I'm nobody but Jodi. And another poet, E. Cummings, said, "To be nobody but yourself in a world that is doing its best night and day to make you everyone else means to fight the hardest battle that any human being has ever fought and never stop fighting." I am nobody but Jodi, but this is who I am, and I want to embrace life, and I don't want to hide anymore, and I want to share my story with so many people. 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk in Danville, Vermont. I don't know if any of you have been to the Northeast Kingdom. There's not a lot there. But I went and was giving an example of a spiritual talk. And part of my talk was saying, let's embrace who we are, that we are nobody but ourselves. And when I got done talking, a line formed, and people came up to me, and they reached their hands out, and they said, I am nobody but Paula. I am nobody but Kathy. And there's just this line of people came to me. And then this little old lady, oh, bless it, she's little, she's maybe 5 feet, I don't think she was, but she came up to me and she said, Jodi, all my life people have been trying to change me. They've been trying to make me be somebody. She said, but I'm telling you, I am nobody but Regina. And she gave me a great big hug. So I want to embrace these moments that we can uplift each other, we can help each other, because the world is full of so much hate, so much passion for hate, and there's still goodness out there that we need to embrace, that we need to hold on to keep going on. Part of being Jodi is I'm a mother, a wife, a daughter, and this fighter of my mental illness. And I am a writer and a poet. Like, I published 2 books of poetry. I was nominated for the state poet. I've won contests and short story contests. Much of my writing is a tool that helps me overcome the emotions that I struggle with daily, about the hearing the negative comments and trying to overcome the sadness with it. I graduated from Trinity College in the 90s, and my first job was a preschool home visitor in the Champlain Islands. And I was not prepared at 24 to see the abuse and neglect of children in their homes. I was so sad. It wore me down. I'd go into these houses and I'd be like, come home with me. I wanted them to come back and have a mother, because some of the mothers were so filled with pain, they didn't know how to care for little ones because they didn't know, no one had cared for them. And so trying to teach them, but seeing the sadness and the sorrow in these little kids, it really triggered trauma in me, and that's when I first started hearing the voices. I think part of it is genetics. My grandmother heard voices, but at the time, I'm 24 years old, I had been dealing with depression off and on, but I'd never heard, and I'm sitting in my car, which was my office at the time, hearing these things, and I didn't know what to do. So for months I hid. I hid from my husband, from my family, and then it just got to be so much that I couldn't cope, and I ended up being hospitalized. Well, I've met a lot of people being hospitalized. Over the last 32 years, I've been hospitalized 40 times. Not always here in Burlington, some other places, but I've always met different people and tried to uplift them even though I've been in the hospital, share some kind of connection. I have a lot of friends who have been from various different times that I've been hospitalized. I take medicine that keeps me alive. Some medicine I've tried that have had serious side effects. In my 20s, I took a medication to try to stop the voices, and it hurt my pancreas, so that I had to start taking insulin. The doctor was very caring. He said, "You would have gotten diabetes in your 70s." I said, "I'm 24. I've had really good doctors, and I've had really poor doctors and nurses. Some people really, they're just in it for power or something, and it saddens me. But there's been some really caring people, like here at the Howard Center, that have been amazing. There's no perfect medicine, and my current psychiatrist, Dr. Lassick, who is from Howard Center, he believes in a real holistic approach, and more he talks about peer support, doing exercise, meditation, finding a benefit beyond just the medication, because the medication is not going to be a cure for everything. One thing I did was, a few years ago, I went to Alyssum. Alyssum is a peer support run house in Rochester, Vermont. And that's where I started my first memoir, Living with the Neighbors. And it's called that because one thing that I do to cope with the voices is that I pretend they are neighbors through a wall. And that I'm just hearing noise, like the noisy neighbors there, that it's not from me, so that I can get on with my life. But when I was there at Rochester, there was farmers' fields all around. and there was a gentle slope that went down to this river. And they, river rocks, they were all smooth and soft and just, it was so beautiful. And it was springtime and the gardens were starting and there were flowers that were coming up. And I learned to let go of some of the baggage. We picked up some of those rocks, and I had never done this before. Threw them as hard as we could into the river. We let the water flow, and we threw our anger into that water and let it just go. And then I would sit in the farmhouse. There's an old farmhouse that was renovated, and I started writing my experiences, the stories from all the hospitalizations, from everything that I've gone through, the trauma. And there was sunshine there. And the light is so beautiful, and when I see it even today, it fills me up with this purpose and goodness. It just makes me happy. So I'm going to share with you a poem that I wrote about the light. Oh, there you are, the light, such a bright friend in the early morning. I lift my head to the great warmth, a date I'd missed because of sadness. I smile into the shine, such a design to overcome depression. I am alive and fill my need with the will to keep going on. For today I am high, flying in the yellow, trying to capture this sensation, write it down, forget the times I frowned into the despair. It is enough to be here in this life, this morning, a wife to my love, a mother to my kids, a writer soaring on the currents of the sunshine, the design of my bipolar, a glimpse for others to see my spectrum, my flow from high to low. I know it is a disease, it is in my genes, but today is wonderful. My sense is not dull as I cast my eyes to the sky to fly in thoughts that are happy, super, wondrous. Even though I recall the lows, the holes I fall into, I still hold tight to this illusion, the glorious light that makes my passion lift others, a gift of words to the world. I fall to knees in the rays to overcome the gray, the way my life sometimes is curled beneath my sheets with tears, fears, thoughts of death in so many breaths, but oh, not now. Today is the beautiful whiteness, the happiness that holds my heart, that wants to share with others this start. I wrap myself in the beginning of a day of my journey to see life in the sensations I embrace in this morning sun. That's an example of one of my poems. In November, I started working with a publisher from England called Trigger Publishing, and they wanted to publish my memoir. So for 5 months, I worked with them. I did revisions. They told me to take out the poetry in my book. I took it out. They said less of this, less of that. I took it out. And then in March, they said, after the third tier of acceptance, they said, I don't think we're going to publish it now. But I wasn't disheartened because I know that there's talent there. I know that because I spent 5 months working with them, that they didn't just send me a form letter. So I'm thinking of other ways, and one of my ways is I would like to develop into a paid speaker. I've given speeches to so many different places and spiritual and mental health agencies and at the Capitol, and I've always volunteered. Well, I'd like to maybe start helping my family by getting paid maybe to share my story. And I thought maybe I could self-publish my memoir from a local Vermont press and have it with me when I give speeches. I am most happiest when I am making connections, when I see the goodness in the world, when I look at someone and I find out interesting things just about that person. A couple years ago, I worked as a cashier at Christmas time at Home Goods. And if any of you have never been a cashier at Christmas time, I really highly recommend that. Yeah, the staff at Home Goods were amazing, and I'm still friends with a lot of them. But it's very interesting the customers that you meet when you're in the Christmas time of year. Well, one customer came, and she's raising her hands, and she's saying, "Jodi!" And she runs up to my cash register. And she says, "It's been so long." And I said, "I'm happy to see you, but I don't know who you are." And she opens her purse and she pulls out a poem I had written her when we were both in the hospital like 5 years ago. She said, "I keep this in my wallet." And I was so happy to meet her that I had given her this that was making her happy, and she still read it. That was really sweet. There are some days that I struggle to be Jodi and accept myself. I'm trying to learn to embrace all of me, even the parts that make up my illness. I have another poem to read. This one just won, last year it won the Counterpoint poetry contest, and an online magazine just wants to publish it for next month. It's called Natural Order. I clip the bush out front, snip branches too long, the ones that don't conform to the shape, the style, the moment I'm trying to make of the front yard. The blades zip together, sharp in their cuts as I continue to pare the leaves, the withered, the dead, for my life could be the springtime of this plant. The flowering bud, the rich green of each leaf, the dark soil feeding, the water quenching, and I could be okay to be okay. I don't have to hurt over the years that the bush didn't grow, didn't make a statement for the yard. I cut and prune, careful in my design, in with the breath. I cast off the unwanted, like the trauma, littering the ground with it, molding my perfection. I stand back to admire and realize there will always be more to take away. But perhaps I can let it go back to its own way of living, happy in the wonder of itself. I close my scissors. Let them rust. Let the beauty be in its living. I sit with sunglasses on, protecting my view as I watch the natural order take care of my yard. And it's okay. So my purpose today is to share with you a little bit of how I speak, to have you see me, have you hear me, hear a little bit of my story, a little bit of my message about trying to maybe help my family financially, but also to have the message that we all can uplift each other and find the goodness and embrace that in life. In my second book, I wrote a poem called Running Through the Fields. I'm going to leave you with this. We are all children running through the fields of life, some on worn paths, some in tall grass, still others rolling in wildflowers. But we are all here together, running through the fields of life. But some, the ones who see beyond the fields, they catch themselves in laughter and make chains of dandelions to wear upon their heads, casting off shoes to run wild in the variety of possibilities. Thanks for being here.